We are in a time of change, great change in every aspect of our world. We are witnessing and feeling the impacts, both positive and negative. In Canada, we're in a time of truth and reconciliation. What does that mean? What truths do we have to reconcile? I know in the grand scheme of things what this means and what's involved. I read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, paying specific attention to the calls to actions involving education. I asked myself this: does reconciliation have to be this grand gesture? Or can it be a series of small actions that create change on a meaningful level? So you're probably wondering, who am I and why do I care? I'm a member of the Lake Babine Nation, which is in the Carrier or Dakelh territory of northern British Columbia. My ancestry is both Carrier and Irish through my paternal grandfather. I am the District Vice Principal of Aboriginal Education for School District 91. I'm also a member of the Aboriginal Leadership Advisory Committee for the BC Principals and Vice Principals Association. I know, swanky, right? Well, I thought, here's my opportunity to create change for the benefit and reconciliation for all students and educators within BC. What I wasn't ready for was the change that was about to occur within my own thinking. Have you ever heard something that was meant to be inconsequential, but had a profound and resounding impact on you? You couldn't shake the words after they left someone's mouth. I did. I was at my first meeting of the Aboriginal Leadership Advisory Committee, and my colleagues were going around the room formally introducing themselves. It was Irene Ives' turn. Irene is a Métis woman who works as a vice principal for the Greater Victoria School District. There were two things that she said that really resonated with my thinking. First, she introduced herself by identifying the last names of the Métis families that she descended from, and also the settlements that they had originated from. Being curious, I immediately started questioning in my mind, is this how Métis people identify themselves? As an Aboriginal person, when other Aboriginal people come up to me and they want to know who I am, they usually ask me two things: where are you from, and who are your grandparents? That connection to place and ancestry being the focus of who I am as an individual within my broader community. It also pointed out my lack of knowledge around Métis customs and culture. She then said something that both intrigued and perplexed me. She said, for those of us who live in the shadows of those raised in culture. I had never heard anyone describe their culture in this way, but it made me think. And after much reflection on this idea, I had a thought. I have cultural privilege. I had never heard this term before, but it was my own conclusion to what she expressed about her identity and how she felt about culture. So I did what any curious person would do. I Googled it. And not just any Google for you academics in the crowd, I know you're there. Google Scholar. What I got back, I wanted to know who else had thought about this before me and what were their thoughts. What I got back was a lot of articles on both culture and privilege, but none as a united idea. The articles that I read had to do with inequality, cultural capital, race and power, linguistics, cultural safety, and cultural competence, to name a few. My definition, in this case, is specific to Aboriginal culture, but could possibly be extrapolated to others. It is exactly what Irene had described. Those with cultural privilege are individuals who are raised within community and have a personal understanding of language, traditional knowledge, and practices. I had never thought of myself in this way before, but I couldn't discount Irene's feelings on the subject. Next, I did something else. I went into my staff room at lunch and posed the question, do we have cultural privilege if we are raised in culture? The immediate and overwhelming reaction was no. This was due to the connection and negative feelings around the idea of white privilege. So, like any typical elementary school staff at lunch, we hotly debated the topic. And by the end of it, the more resistant people in the crowd started seeing the possibilities of the idea. And we arrived at the conclusion that yes, there is a type of advantage of knowing exactly who you are and where you're from. With this acknowledgement, I had a thought. When did I, an Aboriginal woman, go from a state of cultural persecution to the current reality I was now facing, which was cultural privilege? This is a great leap for me, because I too have struggled with my identity in the past. I think that people who are born of mixed ancestry, like myself, often do. I specifically remember being in high school and having a breakdown. To this day, I can't remember why I was feeling this way or what had triggered me. I just remember this overwhelming sense of sadness. I was in grade 11 and my future was in front of me. I was frozen, kind of like right now. And I stayed behind after the bell rang. The students had left, and I couldn't move. I was feeling the two-race binary that I had grown up in, the separate and definitely not equal societal structures that had been my foundation. We were a long way from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report and apology of former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. I had this meltdown where every high school outburst happens in physics class. My lovely teacher came up to me, put her hand on my shoulder, and said, "What's wrong? Worst thing you can do." The floodgates opened, and I was sobbing, and after a while, I was able to form words and calm down. And I expressed to her this displacement that I was feeling. I told her, I'm too light for the Aboriginal kids and not good enough for the white kids. That was 22 years ago, and I was a long way from reconciling my mixed ancestry. It's experiences like this and situations like it that I disagree with the term walking in two worlds. I think it's an artful dance that we must do between the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal worlds in order to succeed, but also to maintain who we are at the same time. Sometimes this dance is beautiful, and other times it's terrifying. So, what implications does this have? After visiting my past, speaking to my friends and colleagues, I had to do some unpacking around my own identity. And in that process, I landed on 4 central ideas. Truth. Privilege exists. Simply put, it exists. It exists between and within cultures, between social classes, within the neighborhoods and countries that we're born into. It exists between all of the invisible boundaries that we've created for ourselves. Truth. A lot of the cultural gaps that exist are within our minds. It's up to us to honor our own stories, and also to respect the stories of others. We will all come to that place of understanding in our own time and in our own way. Truth. Our stories begin long before we are born and will continue long after we leave the physical world. The words that were spoken before us and what we add to the oral traditions of our people will continue to endure and educate for as long as we remain a people. We have a responsibility to that story and the continuation of that narrative. Each of us must never forget that we all come from great cultures and nations and are never less than anyone. Reconciliation. We will begin to achieve this when we realize that your truth is not everyone's truth. Each of us has a role to play in this. But first, we must shed our biases and assumptions. We all have them, and they can be invisible to us. One of the toughest things to do is to reconcile who you truly are. When we begin to move beyond ourselves and really, truly accept our privilege, we can then move on from the past, reconcile the past, and move on to the future together. Masai, Snachalia.